Howdy folks, welcome to the Rifle Chair channel.
Olive, sit. Stay. Stay. Go. Beautiful day. Well, maybe not, but beautiful enough. Let's go this way. Take you for a walk. I'm going to talk to you about the yin and the yang. And why, well, maybe my interpretation is different than yours, but why the yin and the yang is so important today. What the heck are you talking about, Rifle Chair? What is the yin and the yang? Well, it's about striking a balance in your life, so far as kind of the influences that you observe, and striking a balance. Now I'm going to use a couple of different examples to explain this and why it's so pertinent and valuable to us today, to maybe thinking about it a little bit more. You know, if I waited for the weather to get good, I'd never leave the house. Oh wait, yin and yang. So, everybody knows right now that politically people are so polarized and on being pushed to the extremes or to the edges of kind of their political ideologies. And it all just kind of makes sense, I guess. And it's kind of a human question in and of itself as to why the phenomenon that we're observing today is so bad. I mean, just use the U.S. Capitol as a small example. Riots in the streets, you know, all this different stuff. Is that what it really means? Is that people are, if they've had it, they're up to here with it all. And that's a really unhealthy place to be. But here's the thing. When you see these politicians, you know, kind of pushing you to the extremes of what you would consider to be normal. It's not normal anymore. It's the new normal. You have to ask yourself why. And usually the mechanisms that they use in order to achieve this is fear. Do yourself a favor, check out Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Political assassinators, let's put them that way. People who will use you to affect their own personal ideology, so they'll invoke the in order to invoke fear in you, they'll use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For example, they need to be able to endanger certain aspects of your life: shelter, income, well-being, health, all of those different things. If they can affect those in a negative way, then you're just one step closer to being radicalized. And they invoke fear, and they're able to point fingers at the people who they claim to be responsible for your situation. It could be climate change, for example. If we don't essentially shut down our entire energy industry, we're all going to die in a terrible ball of flame, and there'll be no future for your children. All that different stuff. So they can invoke fear in you. A fear response is desirable when you're invoking or using Maslow's hierarchy of needs. That's how you radicalize people. Here's the thing, though. Both sides are being affected with the same mechanism. It doesn't matter if you're right-leaning or left-leaning. Both sides are manipulating you in the same kind of way and against one another, to the point where whenever there is a election, been down here quite often, you see black bears down in this area here. See that little usually the pond is much smaller, but this is a watering hole for wildlife. There's moose, deer, bears, pretty much everything in here. Getting back to the subject, is that both sides do it. Republicans, Democrats, conservatives, liberals, Socialists are really, really good at it. They are literally the professionals at manipulating and scaring people in order to get power. And that's how they do it. But the problem is when the new power seizes the reins of government, what they do is they weaponize government against their political adversaries. So it's so scary whenever an election happens, because the government is going to be weaponized against you by the people that won the election. Mob rules. We see it in the streets of the inner cities, and honestly, it's turned into this phenomenon where it's really no different in your political reality, in the political universe, where the power of government, the mechanisms of government can be affected or manipulated and weaponized against the other half of the population. And that's really dangerous. That's really dangerous. But that appears to be the new normal. What are you doing, Dogness? There's a muskrat around here. Not a muskrat, but a weasel around here. And I've seen lots of weasel shit on the trail. Anyhow, what gets me though is that whether you're left-leaning or right-leaning, what I do know is that we need each other. Because when we cease to be around one another, this vacuum environment exists, where this echo chamber phenomenon exists. All you do is hear right or left propaganda, and you're kind of isolated in one or the other, and we get even further and further apart. And you guys know how social media has been used to encourage that. Now here's the thing with the yin and the yang, and I'll be honest with you, I married a liberal. Mrs. Rifle Chair is a liberal. Now we vote the same, but we are politically very, very different. Very different. And it has been frustrating at times. I will be honest with you. We frequently disagree. And, it would be just so much easier if I had somebody if I married somebody who thought more like me. It would just be easier. But honestly, I would be less if it wasn't for the fact she was so different from me, and that our differences actually do make us stronger, because she forces me outside of my comfort zone to actually think about things that I normally wouldn't. And that is the god-awful truth of it. I think for her, she has been introduced to a totally different world. She's kind of a city girl. I'm more of a remote wilderness kind of guy. I grew up and basically lived my professional life in the woods, a natural resource sector, and we come from totally different backgrounds. We have totally different experiences. We kind of look at life through different lenses and a different filter. And honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that she was so different from me, my life wouldn't have been so interesting, I don't think. Being forced outside your comfort zone, having disagreements. Yeah, we fight sometimes. We disagree. And thank goodness for the fights. But here's the thing, between the two of us, we're not polarized, but we're so different. We're both stronger together as a result, and I think that if we were exactly the same, how boring would that be? Well, really, Canada is no different. Couples are always talking about getting divorced. I mean, well, not always. I mean, it's a subject that we naturally, eventually will start to discuss, because we want to explore what that might mean. You're going to go through kind of hazard assessment process, I guess, for lack of better words, is that you want to try to understand what that world would look like. And so we all have an experience of what it is to see marriages break up. What are you going to do with the children? How is that going to be arranged? Just the time and the energy and the stress and the anxiety that those people have had to go through. They've had to endure that terrible process. And we don't want to go there. Definitely don't want to go there. Of course we talk about it, you know. What normal couple doesn't? At least explore it to a certain extent as to what it would mean. Because sometimes when you're disagreeing on a subject, you think, why the hell are we still together? Canada's going through something exactly the same. And the United States is doing exactly the same. We've got Western separation on the well, it's one of the options of the future. And it's getting worse, simply because the government has essentially weaponized itself against their political adversaries. Now, there are also other ways of looking at it. It has geographic connotations to it as well. If you look at the political map of the United States, essentially all of the coastal states are Democrat, and the entire inner workings of the United States are Republican. Then that is not a surprise to me at all, because what we're referring to now is the rural-urban divide, which is where you have people that are of a specific political influence, in this case, let's say liberal or Democrat, living on the coastlines. These are the major metropolitan areas where most of the population of the United States exists, is on the periphery near a coastline somewhere. And that's where you have these built-up areas where, honestly, the populations are much higher. And frequently they are, it's the metropolitan urban centers that are liberal in nature, where my wife came from. That's kind of, a lot of them think that way. And so you get these kind of regionalized areas where you have people that are in their own vacuum chamber, essentially because they all live the same experience to a large degree, a very similar experience. And it's so much different. For rural people, our lives are totally different. There are some similarities, obviously, but our existences are different. Our experience is different. Working on the land, working in the forest, working in the resource sector, working as a farmer, guide outfitters, fishing resource sector, all of that different kind of stuff kind of falls within kind of your rural mindset. And it is very different and to a certain degree conservative in nature. So you'll see rural areas, not always, but most commonly, rural areas will be conservative or Republican. Metropolitan urban centers will be liberal or Democrat. And so we see this regionalization along ideologies as well. The rural-urban divide. And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. But we are so much better when we're on the same team. When we're on the same side. There's almost nothing that can stop us when we're working together. It's so sad to see. I mean, in many ways, me, living in a rural community, living the life that I have had, I have more in common with, say, somebody, I'm in BC, northern BC, Canada. I have more in common with somebody in northern Quebec that speaks a totally different language than me. I have more in common with that person than I do with people 600 miles away from me living in the nearest city. Anyhow, that's it, folks. If we could actually get on the same side and deal with these petty differences and clean up the politicians that are using our differences to divide us, wow, how great would that be, eh? We wouldn't have to worry about divorce anymore. We're not getting divorced. I'm just using that as an example. Hope we're all doing great. Cheers. Maple Leaf up. Olive.